that the stones used in building the Great Pyramid came from Torah, and Torah is a 25 miles to the east.
What if for decades, the story of the Great Pyramid has sounded simple, settled, and final. We are told the stones were cut from nearby quarries, hauled across the desert, stacked with basic tools, and finished in just 20 years by around 20,000 workers under the command of Pharaoh Khufu. And that's where the story usually ends. But what if nearly everything in that story is wrong? What if the real history of the Great Pyramid has been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years? What if the structure standing on the Giza Plateau is not merely an ancient tomb, but the last remaining achievement of a civilization whose knowledge vanished long before written history even began? Researchers who challenge the official narrative argue that the limestone used for the pyramid may have come from Tura, more than 20 miles east of Giza, raising immediate questions about transport, logistics, and scale. Others go even further, suggesting that parts of the structure could be far older than the Egyptian dynasties themselves. And then there's Graham Hancock. When Hancock first suggested that the conventional explanation for the pyramids simply doesn't work, many dismissed him. But the deeper he investigated, through forgotten maps, declassified scans, neglected ruins, and buried data, the more the puzzle refused to fit the story we were given. What he uncovered has left professional researchers unsettled and millions of readers stunned. Because if Hancock is right, then the Great Pyramid was not built by the civilization we think it was. And the implications of that realization stretch far beyond Egypt. Graham Hancock is not your typical historian. He is not an Egyptologist, not a university professor, and not a product of academic institutions. In fact, that outsider status is precisely what has allowed him to question what others refuse to challenge. Before devoting his life to ancient mysteries, Hancock worked as a respected journalist for The Economist. But in the early 1990s, he made a dramatic shift. He walked away from mainstream reporting and committed himself to a much deeper investigation: the lost story of human civilization. His core questions were disarmingly simple. What if advanced societies existed thousands of years before the dates printed in textbooks? What if a global catastrophe erased them? And what if fragments of their knowledge survived, hidden inside the monuments and myths of later cultures? For more than 3 decades, Hancock has traveled across the world in pursuit of answers. From the pyramids of Egypt to the jungles of Indonesia, from underwater ruins near Japan to massive temple complexes in Central America, he has gathered evidence that challenges the accepted timeline of history. Unlike traditional archaeology, Hancock's work is deliberately multidisciplinary. He studies geology, astronomy, engineering, mythology, ancient languages, climate science, and comparative religion. Searching for connections mainstream academia often keeps in separate boxes. Critics accuse him of promoting dangerous ideas. Some dismiss his work as speculative or unscientific. But millions of people see something different. A researcher asking questions that few others are willing to confront, backed by data, documentation, and decades of investigation. What truly separates Hancock from his critics is not certainty, but persistence. He does not claim to have every answer. Instead, he insists that the official explanation for our past is incomplete, and that the pieces simply do not fit together. Nowhere is this more obvious, Hancock argues, than in the most famous monument on Earth, the Great Pyramid of Giza. According to the official story, the Great Pyramid was built around 2500 BCE as the eternal resting place of Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. We are told that it took just over 20 years to complete, using copper tools, wooden sleds, and the labor of roughly 20,000 skilled workers. The problem is, when you step inside the monument itself, the evidence for that story almost completely disappears. Most royal tombs from ancient Egypt overflow with inscriptions. The walls are covered with prayers, spells from the Book of the Dead, royal names, titles, images of gods, depictions of the afterlife, and long declarations of divine authority. The tombs leave no doubt about who they were built for. But the Great Pyramid does not. Inside its massive chambers, the walls are completely silent. There are no hieroglyphs, no royal dedications, no religious texts. No carved scenes. Nothing. At the heart of the pyramid sits the so-called King's Chamber, where visitors find a single stone box, usually called a sarcophagus. Yet this object raises more questions than it answers. It is plain, undecorated, unmarked, and empty. No mummy has ever been discovered there. No burial goods, no royal seals, no trace of any funeral ritual. In other words, there is no physical evidence inside the pyramid that Khufu or any pharaoh was ever buried in it. So where does the connection to Khufu come from? Almost entirely from one questionable discovery. In 1837, a British explorer named Colonel Howard Vyse used explosives to force his way into a sealed series of chambers above the King's Chamber. Inside, he claimed to have found quarry markings written in red paint. Among these marks were symbols that he interpreted as the name of Khufu. That discovery became the cornerstone of the official narrative. But Hancock and many other researchers have pointed out serious problems with this story. First, Vyse was in direct competition with another explorer who was about to make a major breakthrough. He desperately needed a discovery of his own to secure fame, funding, and recognition. Second, Vyse was alone when he entered the chamber. No independent witnesses were present when the markings were supposedly found. Third, several inconsistencies appear in his journals regarding the discovery. Some of the recorded symbols do not match the writing conventions of Khufu's time. The placement of the marks is also strange, hidden in an inaccessible space that no worker would reasonably have bothered to decorate. Most importantly, those quarry marks remain the only direct piece of evidence connecting Khufu to the Great Pyramid. There are no construction records from his reign describing the project. No inscriptions in other temples praising him for building it. No papyrus documents explaining how it was accomplished. No reliefs carved into stone celebrating the achievement. For a civilization that recorded almost everything, this silence is deafening. Hancock proposes a far more unsettling explanation. He suggests that Khufu did not build the Great Pyramid at all. Instead, he may have inherited an already ancient structure, restored parts of it, and then claimed ownership of it, as later rulers so often did with monuments they did not fully understand. This idea also explains something else that has long puzzled historians: the strange decline in pyramid construction quality after Khufu's reign. The Great Pyramid is nearly perfect. Its stones fit with breathtaking precision. Its geometry is astonishing. Its internal chambers are marvels of design and stability. But most pyramids built after it are structurally inferior. Many began to collapse within decades. Some are now little more than crumbling mounds of rubble. If the Egyptians learned how to build at such an advanced level with the Great Pyramid, why did they suddenly lose that knowledge? Unless they never had it in the first place. According to Hancock, the Great Pyramid may have already been ancient even in Khufu's time, a surviving relic of a much older civilization whose origins were already lost to history. And if that is true, then the next question becomes unavoidable. How was it built? Because what we are about to examine is not just impressive for the ancient world. It is something modern engineers still struggle to explain. When the myths are stripped away and the raw engineering of the Great Pyramid is examined, something deeply unsettling emerges. This was not a primitive construction project. It was a masterpiece of precision engineering that even today would challenge the most advanced builders on Earth. Let's start with the alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north with an error of less than 0.05 degrees. Not magnetic north, which shifts over time, but true north, a direction that modern surveyors measure using satellites and advanced instruments. Yet somehow, more than 4,500 years ago, this alignment was achieved with staggering accuracy. Then there is the foundation. The pyramid's base covers more than 13 acres and is level to within less than 1 inch across the entire surface. Even with modern laser-guided leveling systems, achieving that degree of flatness over such a massive area would be considered an extraordinary engineering accomplishment. Next comes the stonework itself. The casing stones and internal blocks were cut and fitted so precisely that in many places a razor blade cannot be inserted between them. The joints are not merely tight, they are engineered. Some are angled, others slightly curved. The stones interlock in ways that distribute weight and absorb stress, increasing the structure's long-term stability. This is not crude stacking. This is deliberate, calculated craftsmanship. Now consider the tools the official narrative gives us: copper chisels and dolerite pounding stones. Copper is far too soft to cut granite efficiently. Experimental archaeology has attempted to reproduce the pyramid's construction methods using these tools. The results are sobering. Progress is painfully slow. The cuts are rough and inaccurate. The tools degrade quickly. Yet the Great Pyramid contains over 2.3 million blocks. Many weigh between 2 and 15 tons. Each block had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and placed with extreme precision. According to the accepted timeline, all of this was done in roughly 20 years. That would require placing one block every 2.5 minutes, continuously, day and night, for 2 decades without pause. Without error, and with perfect mathematical consistency. Then there are the internal chambers. The Grand Gallery rises with perfect symmetry and elegance. The King's Chamber is constructed from massive granite beams, arranged to distribute unimaginable weight. Above it are relieving chambers that protect the space below from collapse. The pyramid's geometry encodes astonishing knowledge. The ratio of its height to its base reflects the constant pi. Its dimensions reflect the solar year. Its orientation aligns with cardinal directions with uncanny precision. Some researchers even argue it encodes information about the size and shape of the Earth. This is not merely architecture. It is applied science in stone. Even more puzzling, when historians examine pyramids built after Khufu's era, they see a dramatic decline in quality. Many later pyramids are structurally unstable, poorly aligned, and crudely constructed. So how could ancient builders begin with near perfection and then progressively lose the ability to replicate it? To Hancock, the conclusion is unavoidable. The Great Pyramid was not the product of gradual technological development within the Old Kingdom. It was either inherited, repurposed, or built by a civilization possessing knowledge and methods we no longer understand. Whatever its true origin, one thing is certain. The Great Pyramid was not merely built, it was engineered. And as extraordinary as its construction is, an even greater mystery remains. Because building the pyramid is only half the puzzle. Moving its materials is something else entirely. If the precision of the Great Pyramid's construction is astonishing, the logistics of moving its materials push the mystery into another realm entirely. Especially when we reach the heart of the structure, the king's chamber. Unlike most of the pyramid, which is built primarily from limestone, the king's chamber is constructed from massive blocks of granite. Granite is far harder, denser, and heavier than limestone, and it did not come from nearby. It came from Aswan. The Aswan quarries lie more than 500 miles south of Giza. Some of the granite beams used in the king's chamber weigh between 60 and 80 tons each. That is roughly the weight of a fully loaded modern locomotive. Now imagine moving multiple locomotives upstream along the Nile, unloading them without cranes, dragging them across open land, lifting them over 150 feet into the air, and placing them with millimeter precision inside a stone structure, using nothing but ropes, wooden sleds, and human muscle. That is what the official narrative asks us to believe. Yet when engineers examine this claim, the story collapses under its own weight. The most common explanation is the ramp theory, enormous earthen ramps built alongside the growing pyramid, allowing workers to haul the stones upward. But this solution introduces more problems than it solves. For a ramp to reach the top of the pyramid at a workable slope, it would need to extend for nearly a mile and contain more material than the pyramid itself. Constructing such a ramp would require vast resources, time, and labor, and then removing it would be another massive project. Yet no trace of such a structure has ever been found. No foundations, no remains, no debris field. Nothing. Some propose spiral ramps, others suggest internal ramps, but these ideas remain theoretical. None are supported by physical evidence capable of explaining the transport of 80-ton granite beams into the core of the structure. And even if we momentarily accept the idea of ramps, another impossible question remains. How were the stones lifted and positioned with such precision at extreme heights? Modern construction requires cranes, steel cables, hydraulic systems, and advanced engineering software to achieve similar results. The ancient Egyptians are credited with doing it using only basic materials and brute force. No contemporary records describe the process. No diagrams, no instructions, no manuals, no surviving equipment. What remains is silence. And in that silence, Hancock sees the outline of a forgotten chapter of human history. He suggests that the civilization responsible for the Great Pyramid possessed technologies or methods that were lost in a global catastrophe, perhaps the same cataclysm recorded in flood myths and destruction legends found across cultures worldwide. If such a civilization existed, Its survivors may have passed fragments of their knowledge to later societies, who preserved the monuments, but not the science behind them. The Egyptians may not have built the Great Pyramid. They may have inherited it. And that changes everything. Because if the Great Pyramid was already ancient when Egypt's dynasties rose, then its builders belonged to a time that modern history does not recognize. A time when human civilization may have been far more advanced than we are willing to admit. When all of these pieces are placed together, the Great Pyramid no longer looks like a simple royal tomb from a primitive civilization. It looks like the last standing monument of something far older, far more complex, and far more unsettling. For thousands of years, humanity has believed that civilization slowly climbed out of darkness, from stone tools to empires, from mud huts to monuments. But the Great Pyramid refuses to fit into that comfortable narrative. Its precision, scale, and sophistication appear suddenly in the archaeological record, without clear predecessors, and without adequate explanation. And then, just as strangely, that level of engineering disappears. Later pyramids deteriorate. Construction quality declines. Architectural knowledge fades. History, it seems, moves backward. Hancock argues that this reversal only makes sense if the Great Pyramid was inherited from an earlier world, a lost civilization whose technological achievements were wiped out by a global catastrophe around 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. Around that time, Earth experienced massive climate upheavals, rising seas, violent floods, collapsing ecosystems, and widespread destruction. Cultures across the globe preserve stories of a great flood, a time when the world was destroyed and reborn. What if those myths are not metaphors? What if they are memories? In this view, the Great Pyramid becomes something far more than a tomb. It becomes a time capsule, a message in stone, carrying fragments of lost knowledge across the ages. Its geometry encodes astronomical cycles. Its alignment preserves cosmic precision. Its construction defies primitive explanation. Perhaps it was built not to honor a king, but to preserve information, not to glorify power, but to withstand time itself. And if that is true, then the Great Pyramid is not merely part of ancient history. It is part of human prehistory. The implications are enormous. It would mean that advanced knowledge existed long before our timelines allow, that human civilization may have risen and fallen more than once, that our own world may not be the first to reach great heights, nor the last. The resistance to these ideas is fierce, and understandably so. They challenge careers, institutions, and deeply held assumptions about who we are and where we come from. But the monument itself remains, silent and immovable, standing on the Giza Plateau, exactly as it has for thousands of years. A structure that refuses to fully explain itself. The Great Pyramid does not tell us its story. It forces us to ask better questions. Who truly built it? What knowledge did they possess? What catastrophe erased them from history? And what fragments of that forgotten world still lie buried beneath the sands of time? Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how the pyramid was built, but why its builders wanted it to last forever. Because in the end, the Great Pyramid stands as a reminder that our understanding of the past is incomplete, fragile, and constantly evolving. And the deeper we look, the more it seems that the story of human civilization is far older, far stranger, and far more extraordinary than we. have ever been taught.